Well, hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of The Next Multibagger. Today I have the pleasure on bringing on Edmund McCormack, founder and CEO of Dechained, an investment advisor firm that provides education, investing recommendations, and market information for cryptocurrencies. Edmund has prior experience working at Apple and Teads and is also currently a managing partner at Dechained Capital. So thanks for coming on, Edmund. I'm excited to talk with you today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Excited to talk to your audience today as well.
Okay, great. So I thought it would be great if we can first jump into you telling us a little bit more about yourself and also how you first got started investing into cryptocurrency.
Yeah, so as you touched on, right now, I oversee not only an investment advisory firm, which is really focused in on providing education for people interested in getting involved in crypto, but I also am a managing partner in a blockchain fund. So I'm both a retail investor and helping people on the investment advisor side, but also an institutional as well. So I have a little bit of background on both ends. Aside from that, I have, financial backing. So I have, a licensed broker dealer. I have my investment advisory, investment banking. So Series 63, 65, 79. And, from an experience standpoint, I built my career in tech, your traditional tech companies over the last 15 years. And during that time, about 10 years ago, actually, October 2011, so a little over 10 years ago, I got involved with Bitcoin first. I was out on a work trip. A bunch of the engineers that I was having lunch with were talking about blockchain in general and different use cases that they saw fit for it. And as they were talking about it, they talked about this monetary protocol, this standard, very similar to as if you were to talk about, what is the standard for how email is sent? What's the standard for how video conferences are done? They talked like that about money, and it really clicked in my brain. So I got, very intrigued. I started investing. That at that point, investing in crypto, well, at that time, Bitcoin was the only game in town, but investing in Bitcoin was a lot different than it is today. There were no, Coinbase where you could just go in and your bank is already synced up. It involved a number of different steps, including having to wire money internationally. So I'll just leave it at that. So it was a little bit of a gray area to even get involved, but to see this space evolve and mature to the place that it is today, it's been phenomenal.
Definitely. No, thanks for sharing your story. And I'm excited to hear about your shift into working in a corporate typical style versus actually wanting to start your own crypto education company. Can you walk us a little bit through that?
Yeah. So the idea was actually born out of losing my job, which is funny. Funny now, not then. So it was 2016. It was January 2016. I remember second to last night of my honeymoon. My wife and I were in Thailand. It was the trip, of a lifetime, something you dream of. And my phone explodes. It's 4 a.m. there. And at that time, I was working at Apple, and Tim Cook just announced that internally that we would be shutting down a number of different divisions in a step towards securing better consumer privacy. So it left me a lot of time to think on that 13-hour plus trip home. And it dawned on me that the model that we had, the web model, where really it's only a handful of companies that really are owning and sort of account for the lion's share of all traffic, Google, Facebook, Amazon, et cetera. What happens when all of a sudden this becomes under fire, when this gets started to get questioned by governments and people start to ask questions about their data? And coincidentally, a little bit later that year, those questions actually were answered with Cambridge Analytica and the election that happened here in the US at that time. And that's when I started to think about those things that those engineers are talking about with blockchain, and how this really could be a tipping point for us moving towards what's that next tech evolution. We had that evolution in the 90s when retail and communication really were brought into our homes through the internet. But this is the next evolution. And while I didn't jump immediately into launching something in the blockchain space, it was always something I was working on, and finally was able to launch it a couple of years ago with the idea of helping people learn about the space, get involved, and just have a place to turn to if they had questions.
Oh, definitely. That's great to hear. I think especially with this new boom of Web 3.0 and more people getting interested and invested in themselves, I think it's great to have these sort of resources to not only kind of walk through the basics of cryptocurrency, but really kind of have a formal outline of exactly what it's all about. I find that right now, a lot of the times that when I research crypto, there's tons of different information all around, and it's kind of hard to really track down exactly what the right things to really learn. So it's great to hear that you're trying to help educate other people within the space.
Yeah, the problem is there's two things. One, people don't know what they don't know. So that's going to inherently leave a lot of gaps in people's overall knowledge of the space. If you don't know to start looking at, for instance, for today, what is the Federal Reserve talking about and how does inflation impact the price of Bitcoin and Ethereum? You wouldn't know that, and you would right now start looking at why are all prices going down. So it helps for a location or just a repository to package that up in a very neat and easy to understand way. The other is that, as you mentioned before, there's no shortage of information on crypto online. But I always ask people, how many people do you know that are just killing it? Like multi-millionaire, not bought a lotto ticket, got in on SHIB super early, had no idea what they bought, wound up making a lot of money, but actually knew what they were doing. And how many of those people do you know? Mm-hmm. Oftentimes, a lot of people either don't, or maybe know one, maybe two. Luckily, if they know two, which is surprising because there's an abundance of information out there. And the problem is that if you look at the data and you look at sort of what the content is, it sort of falls into a few different buckets. It's either, on the one hand, way too technical. There's a tremendous amount of positive information in there, but people just don't understand it unless you understand, complex financial or development terms. It's either too shallow and it just gives too high level, and it's really not giving a lot of substance in terms of what the driving factors are, or it's purely just entertainment. And that's a really dangerous area, especially as you start to go on YouTube and social media. What's entertainment versus what's information? And that's where things can get a little tricky.
Definitely. I think you hit the nail on the head. There's a fine line between influencing and trying to just kind of have this sort of entertainment, and for actual financial advice and that kind of financial information. It's there's so much information out there right now, but I'm happy to share what we know about cryptocurrency for everyone else. So I know you touched a little bit about your experience with Dechained Capital. Can you talk a little bit about that and exactly what that firm does?
Yeah, so we're a cryptocurrency hedge fund. Our primary focus is finding blockchain leaders in what we see high growth sectors. So that's Web3, entertainment, finance, and then transportation, medicine. And these are sectors that, similar to how you saw Airbnb disrupt the hospitality sector, Uber, transportation, we see that these are sectors that are ripe for tremendous disruption with blockchain technology. And I gave an example. We had a conversation earlier in the week. Take medicine, for example. One of the biggest challenges, aside from security, because one of the easiest targets for ransomware are these local health networks. But one of the biggest missed opportunities that exist out there is just how much data is produced by the average US hospital. There was a study recently done by Deloitte that talked about how over the average US hospital produces enough data to fill 500 billion printed pages. And almost all of that is gone to waste. Nothing is done with it. Now, think about what could happen if that data was shared in a very privacy compliant way, because you got to obey by HIPAA. But if it was shared with university researchers or medical device manufacturers or pharmaceutical companies, you're talking about a tremendous amount of high quality data that's just not being used. And this is where, with blockchain and being able to facilitate that sharing of information in a privacy compliant way, you can now start to really fuel machine learning, AI, both of which require a ton of information to train the systems. You now have that pipeline directly there. And then on top of that, as 5G becomes more ingrained in our lives, to be able to pull information as we're going about our daily lives, not in the hospital. So that's just one sort of example here, but there are companies that are right now at the front line of some really cutting edge stuff, and we want to invest in them.
Definitely, no, and that's really exciting, that use case. I think, as we all know, data is so powerful in today's society, and it's become a gold mine for companies to utilize, kind of better themselves and to continue bettering their operations. So seeing an industry with healthcare that's, to me, not really disrupted by tech, it's still pretty old-fashioned. For them to start adopting those kind of blockchain technologies is really exciting. And I think there's a bright future for not only healthcare, but a lot of these other industries that are still lacking on that kind of technology front.
Yeah, exactly.
Great. So I know you touched a little bit on investing in these leaders in this space. Can you talk a little bit about some exciting spaces that you have been watching and that you've personally been investing into?
Yeah, so I think one of the most exciting areas for me is these liquidity aggregators. So if you look at where most money in crypto sits